They said rain was a blessing. That night, it was a curse. The rain slapped against the cracked pavement as Grace dragged her mother's old suitcase through the flooded street. She was soaked to the bone, every step pulling her deeper into the cold, muddy water. She had no umbrella, no jacket, and no home. Just an address scribbled on a torn piece of paper, the house her stepmother lived in. The only door left to knock on. When the tall iron gates of Margaret's mansion loomed ahead, Grace almost cried from relief. Almost. She pressed the buzzer, heart hammering, while thunder cracked overhead. For a long time, nothing. Then, a low mechanical whine, and the gates inched open. A maid peeked through the doorway, her eyes darting nervously left and right. She opened the door just enough for Grace to slip inside, whispering one strange warning as she passed, "Keep your head down, small madam." Grace barely had time to wonder what she meant. In the main hall, her stepmother, Margaret, stood like a queen. Dripping diamonds, wrapped in a silk robe, her smile was wide, too wide. "Grace," she said warmly, arms open. "Come, my dear child. You are safe now." Grace collapsed into the hug, her throat thick with tears. Maybe things would finally be okay. Maybe blood still meant something. She couldn't have been more wrong. The days that followed peeled away the illusion faster than skin under a blade. Grace wasn't treated like family, she was treated like furniture. Invisible. Disposable. Angela, her stepsister, sneered at her clothes. Margaret made her scrub floors until her hands bled, run errands in the sun without shoes, serve guests like a lowly maid. Still, Grace swallowed it all. She had nowhere else to go. Being humiliated was better than sleeping in the streets, wasn't it? Then came the engagement party. Angela had landed a golden fish, Samoa Adebanjo, a powerful CEO with deep pockets and darker rumors trailing him like a scent. The whole house bloomed in expensive flowers and flashy decorations. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. Music filled the halls. Grace, dressed in a worn-out maid uniform, stayed in the background, carrying trays no one bothered to thank her for. But late that night, after the last drunk guest stumbled away, Margaret called Grace to the back garden. The laughter was gone now. Only shadows remained. "You owe us," Margaret said, voice like cold steel. "Without me, you'd be rotting on the streets." I'm grateful," Grace whispered, weary. "Good. Then repay us." Margaret's smile twisted. "Samoa has asked for a special gift before the wedding. One night with you. Your purity for our future." The world shifted beneath Grace's feet. "No," she gasped. Margaret slapped her across the face so hard the night spun sideways. "You will obey," she snarled. "Or you will leave with nothing." As rain began to fall again, softer this time, Grace realized the real storm had only just begun. And this house wasn't a refuge. It was a market, and she was the price. The house had never felt more like a prison. Margaret's command rang in Grace's ears as she sat frozen on the small stool in her tiny servant's room. One night. One gift to Samoa Adebanjo. The price of survival. She pressed her forehead against her knees, willing herself to disappear. A soft knock at the door startled her. It wasn't Margaret. It was Angela. Angela, golden-skinned, draped in a white silk robe, glowing like the chosen daughter. For a fleeting moment, Grace thought maybe she had come to help. Maybe she would stop this madness. But Angela only smirked, a cold glint in her eyes. "Don't ruin it for us," she whispered. "You owe Mother everything." Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of perfume and cruelty behind. Later that night, the house fell into a tense silence. The staff had been dismissed early. The lights in the guest quarters dimmed. And Grace, trembling in a plain cotton dress Margaret had thrown at her, was led upstairs by one of the guards to Samuel's private lounge. He was waiting for her, sprawled on a leather couch, a glass of expensive whiskey dangling from his hand. His eyes, bloodshot and sharp, raked over her like she was merchandise. "You learn to enjoy it," he slurred. Grace's fingers trembled at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she had nowhere to go, no money, no allies, no freedom. Samuel reached for her wrist. In that moment, something inside Grace snapped. She stepped forward, then deliberately tipped over the heavy crystal decanter on the table. Liquor spilled across Samuel's trousers. He cursed and leapt up, trying to pat himself dry. And Grace ran. She bolted down the hall, heart slamming against her ribs, footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She threw herself down the servants' staircase, barefoot, ignoring the sharp pain as she stumbled onto the gravel outside. The gate was locked. Of course it was. But behind the kitchen, there was a narrow drainage passage, a gap small enough for a child to wriggle through. Without thinking, Grace dropped to her knees, scraping her elbows, pushing herself through the filthy opening. Freedom was only a few agonizing feet away. Behind her, shouts erupted, guards realizing she was missing. Grace wriggled through, tore the hem of her dress, sliced her knee on a broken pipe, and finally tumbled out onto the dark, empty street. Breathless. Bloody. Alive. But freedom was just the start of another kind of hunger. No money. No shelter. No food. And worse. She had made an enemy far more powerful than she could imagine. As she limped away into the night, Grace had no idea that Samuel Odebanjo wasn't a man used to losing. And he would hunt her. Because men like Samuel never let their prizes escape. Not without blood. Grace had always imagined Lagos as a city of opportunity. Bright lights. Big dreams. The way her father once described it, a place where even orphans could rise if they worked hard enough. But that was before she became prey. The streets offered no protection. The rain had stopped, but the cold gnawed at her bones. Her thin cotton dress clung to her scraped skin. She limped from alley to alley, avoiding anyone who looked twice at her. At first, she thought she could disappear. Blend into the endless sea of tired faces. Maybe even find honest work cleaning offices or carrying goods in the market. But Margaret and Samuel had other plans. 2 days after her escape, Grace saw her own face glaring back at her from a television behind a street vendor stand. Her photo, grainy but clear, floated under bold headlines, "Fugitive Maid Wanted for Theft from Prominent CEO." Grace's stomach twisted into a hard knot. She staggered away before the vendor could turn and recognize her. Panic surged through her veins. How had Samuel moved so fast? How had he twisted the story so easily? Now, even if she went to the police, no one would believe her. Samuel had money. Power. Influence. She was just a nameless girl with dirt under her fingernails. The city wasn't just indifferent. It was a wolf pack, and it was hunting her. Days blurred together. She slept behind abandoned kiosks, curled into herself for warmth. She picked half-eaten fruits from garbage bins behind restaurants. Hunger gnawed her insides like rats. She sold her shoes for a handful of naira that barely bought her a sachet of water. Hope faded like the bruises on her knees. On the 6th night, shivering under a rickety shed near Oberland, Grace met Madame Stella. A short, sharp-eyed woman with a colorful scarf tied tightly around her head, Madame Stella ran a second-hand bookstore that no one visited anymore. She found Grace cowed beside her doorstep at dawn, too weak to run. "Another broken bird," Stella muttered. Instead of shouting or chasing her away, she tossed a crust of bread onto Grace's lap. "Eat, then explain," she said, turning the open sign around on the door. Through a hoarse voice and tears she could no longer control, Grace told her everything: the stepmother, the betrayal, the man who haunted her. Stella listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, Stella simply nodded. "You're not the first," she said. "But you'll be one of the few who gets back up." Grace didn't understand then. But she clutched onto the old woman's words like a drowning person clutches a life buoy. She slept in a corner of the bookstore that night, surrounded by dusty books and the smell of old paper. For the first time in what felt like years, Grace dreamed not of monsters, but of fighting back. She was still bleeding. Still broken. But she was not finished. Grace stayed at Madame Stella's bookstore for weeks, hiding behind towers of dusty novels and second-hand encyclopedias. The old woman taught her how to survive quietly, how to spot police patrols before they spotted her, how to move like a shadow through the back streets of Lagos. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Every time Grace passed a newsstand and caught a glimpse of her own face, wanted, dangerous, maid on the run, rage burned hotter in her chest. Samuel's lies had reached every corner of the city. Even churches warned their flock against harboring fugitives. Grace realized that if she didn't fight back, she would be haunted until she broke. Or worse, until Samuel found her first. One night, seated on a crate under a flickering bulb, she finally asked Madame Stella, "How do you destroy a man like Samuel?" The old woman chuckled dryly, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. "You don't punch up at giants," she said. "You cut their legs out from under them." Grace leaned forward. "Show me how." And so began her real education. During the day, Grace posed as a cleaner in small hotels and lounges, slipping into the crowds unnoticed. At night, she used Stella's battered laptop to learn everything she could: basic law, recording devices, how powerful men like Samuel protected themselves, and how sometimes they slept. Stella connected her with a network. A quiet group of young women who had been abused and discarded by rich predators just like Samuel. They called themselves the Daughters of Dust, survivors who refused to disappear. Together, they built a plan. Grace would not run anymore. She would expose Samuel, publicly, completely. First, she gathered evidence. An old cleaner from Samuel's company agreed to help after hearing Grace's story. She slipped Grace's old payroll records, showing hush money payments to other young maids and assistants who had mysteriously resigned. Next came the trap. Angela's second wedding anniversary was coming up, a grand party Samuel planned to throw to showcase his wealth and loyalty to the Odebanjo family. Grace knew he would be drunk, arrogant, surrounded by people who thought they were untouchable. Perfect. Using forged documents, Grace got herself hired as part of the cleaning crew for the event. Madame Stella sewed a tiny recorder into the hem of Grace's maid uniform. "You only get one shot," Stella warned. "Be smart." The night of the party, the Odebanjo mansion glittered like a palace. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities flowed in, laughing and sipping champagne. And Grace, invisible in her uniform, slipped through the golden halls like a blade waiting for its moment. Her hands shook as she adjusted the hidden mic under her sleeve. She was terrified. She was hungry. She was ready. In the distance, she spotted Samuel in the main study, already half drunk, his arms slung lazily around a laughing Angela. Tonight, Grace vowed silently, would be the last night he ever destroyed a girl's life. Tonight, the haunted would become the haunter. Grace's heart pounded so hard it was a wonder no one heard it. The recorder hidden in her uniform was live. Every move she made now mattered. She slipped along the edges of the ballroom, carrying a tray of champagne glasses no one cared to notice. From her vantage point, she could see Samuel, loud, drunk, careless, boasting to a group of politicians and businessmen. She didn't need him to confess everything. She just needed him to sleep. And men like Samuel always did, eventually. The opportunity came faster than expected. Grace followed a hunch and headed toward the study again. She knew Samuel liked to retreat there once the party wore on, away from the crowds to conduct his more private affairs. Sure enough, she found him lounging with two powerful guests, his glass refilled, his voice loose with alcohol. Grace pretended to dust a nearby shelf as she listened. Little girls nowadays, Samuel was saying with a laugh. They think they're too good. Too pure. Huh. They come from the gutters. One offer, one night, and they'll kneel. Like that house girl. What was her name? Grace. The men chuckled darkly. Thought she could run, Samuel bragged, slushing his drink onto the floor. But we fixed her reputation good, didn't we? She'll never show her face again. Grace clenched the duster in her hand so hard it almost snapped. There it was. The truth. On tape. She forced herself to stay calm as Samuel dismissed the conversation with a wave and the men staggered back toward the ballroom. She had to get out of here. Now. Turning, Grace nearly crashed straight into Angela. Her stepsister stood blocking the door, a glass of red wine balanced carelessly in her hand. For a moment, neither spoke. Angela's eyes narrowed. You look familiar, she said slowly, tilting her head. Grace dropped her gaze and tried to move past, but Angela grabbed her wrist roughly. You're her, Angela hissed. You're Grace. Around them, the noise of the party roared louder, oblivious. Before Angela could call security, Grace leaned closer, her voice low and dangerous. Go ahead. Shout. Bring the guards, Grace said. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know your husband isn't just a liar, he's a predator. And you? You married him to save your mother's ambition. Angela's hand faltered. The blood drained from her face. Grace didn't wait. She slipped away into the crowd, moving faster now, heart hammering. At dawn, the video recordings, voice clips, payroll documents, and testimonies were released anonymously to news outlets across the country. The fallout was immediate. Samuel Adebanjo was arrested under a whirlwind of charges: coercion, abuse, obstruction of justice. Margaret faced investigations for human trafficking and conspiracy. Angela, stripped of her fairytale marriage and title, disappeared from the social scene overnight. Grace, for the first time in her life, stood tall. With help from Madame Stella and the Daughters of Dust, she founded a non-profit, The Price of a Roof, dedicated to rescuing other girls like her, who are traded like currency and silenced by fear. She wore her scars openly, like armor. She would never be caged again. And in the quiet of her small new office, surrounded by battered second-hand books and bright-eyed survivors, Grace finally understood, the rain hadn't cursed her after all. It had washed her clean. So she could start again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more emotional, inspiring tales, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support helps us bring even more voices and stories to life. See you in the next video.